Hey there, everybody. I'm Seja Popham, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And been getting some questions in from the community lately as I've been sharing more about vitalism and vitalist traditions of herbalism and, a little bit on how it's really transformed and impacted my life. As just a human, but also as an herbalist, and also looking at how the principles of vitalism really extend beyond herbal medicine and influence how we work with people as a healer and as we try to live a life, a healthier life, a vibrant, vital life. But a lot of people have been asking, like, what does this actually look like? How do we, in like our daily life, in our daily practice, what are things, like practical things that we can do in order to just live in accordance with some of these principles? And so I thought I would share some really simple things on how we can do that, how we can live a life that follows the vital intelligence of nature. And, to me, this is so much of what vitalism is about, well, first off, recognizing that nature is intelligent, that our body is nature, we are nature, and that we have the capacity to learn from nature and study nature and understand how that nature externally is also within us, and seeing that pattern between the macrocosm and the microcosm. And so I wanted to share a little bit of really what that looks like in terms of kind of our daily life, like our daily simple, like these are super, super simple daily practices, but they're actually really quite profound, because what they do is they start to establish our rhythm and aligning our rhythm to the rhythms of the seasons, to the rhythm of the daily cycle, so that we're more living in harmony with the natural world. And to me, this is one of those things that, when we as humans were living closer to nature, these things were probably a lot easier to do then. And for some reason, some of these things are difficult to do in our modern world, especially as, we got, deadlines and schedules, and, so sometimes some of these may be impractical for some people, but it's all about really just lining your life up with the rhythm of nature. So let's talk about the daily practices. I've only got a couple here, but they're really, really simple. The first one is get up with the sun. I think there's something about rising with the sun in terms of moving with the natural world that is really, really important, in that the rest of nature is waking up. There's an energy to the rising sun and the new day, where if we line up our waking with that energy, it kind of revitalizes us, it rejuvenates us. And this is a practice that really a lot of cultures talk about the importance of it, for different reasons. Some really speak to it for spiritual reasons, some speak to it more for practical reasons. But this dynamic of waking up really like before the sun comes up and being able to be outside and witness that dawn, there is a rejuvenation and a revitalization that happens at that time to our bodies, to our minds. Many cultures speak to that being a very powerful time to engage in your spiritual practice, whatever that might be, meditation or prayer, that there's a potency at that kind of pre-dawn time, it kind of gives your spiritual practice a little bit of a boost. But one thing that I found with it, as I've practiced this admittedly off and on over the years, there's times where I'm really on it and really good about it, and there's times where it's a little more difficult. As hard as it can be, especially in the summer here in the Northwest, when you got to get up at 4:30 in the morning to kind of greet that dawn. Even when you're really, really tired, there's something about that time that it gets your day going in a different way. And to me, there's a just flowing with that energy of the sun is a really profound vitalist practice. The second one I wanted to mention here is, as I've talked about in a number of previous videos, is how important food and digestion is in vitalist traditions. And this daily practice is really kind of simple, but it really is about eating according to your activity levels and eating when digestion is strong. And so in both Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine, they say there are times of the day when our certain organs of the body are more active. And those are times when, that organ is strong. And so in this perspective, there's a time when our digestion is really active, and those are the best times. That's the best time to actually eat kind of the bulk meal of the day, which tends to be kind of later morning, early afternoon. And so there's a dynamic here of eating in a way that's appropriate for your unique lifestyle. Someone that's sitting at a desk all day probably doesn't need to eat the same way that someone working, a super physically active like construction job outside all day needs to eat, right? Because they're burning a different amount of energy in order to do their work. And so to me, this is a very vitalist approach, is like understand what your activity level is and to adjust the diet and the food and the timing of it in a way that is flowing with the intelligence of the body and when the body is ready to be receiving nourishment. And it's interesting, at least in American culture, what's the biggest meal of the day typically? It's dinner. And it's like dinner time is usually when people are eating their, they've got their chicken and they've got their, potatoes or their rice or their vegetables or whatever it is. It's like dinner is like the meal of the day. And it kind of doesn't really make that much sense, right? It's like it's the last meal of the day. Typically people are kind of winding it down towards the end of the day. You're not doing a bunch of stuff. And for some reason, it just doesn't really make that much sense if you really think about vitalism to eat the biggest meal of the day at the end of the day. And this is why in a lot of cultures that it's actually kind of the morning, like the breakfast or the mid-afternoon, early afternoon meal should really be when we're eating the bulk amount of our proteins and our fats and the things that are harder to digest, because that's when digestion is strong, and that's typically when we're the most active and when we need that extra energy to burn in order to stay active. So that's a really great daily practice to get into. And again, I feel like it's all about taking these principles and figuring out how it uniquely works for you. I don't believe in getting too overly militant and strict and rigid about these things, because that's ultimately, it's just going to stress you out, right? Which we don't want to do. This is all about finding your own unique flow with these things. So I just wanted to mention that really quick, because I know some people are going to be like, well, what time should I do this? And what time should I do that? And and it's all about like finding what works for you. So the third part that I think is really, really big here is, I think, in my opinion, every day you should go outside and go for a walk in nature as much as you can, or, at least go outside and go for a walk and pay attention to the nature that you can see. Maybe that's just looking up at the sky, or maybe that's just paying attention to, the plants growing in the cracks of the sidewalk if you're a city dweller, like whatever that looks like for you. I think a majority of people's lives these days tend to be much more stagnant in terms of, maybe we get into our car and drive to work and maybe sit in traffic for a while and get out and go to work. And a lot of jobs these days are pretty sessile, right? We're not moving around that much, and maybe get in the car, go back home. And then it's like there's not always a lot of certainly not for everyone, but it's very easy for people to kind of slip into a pattern of, not just going for a little walk or getting a little bit of exercise in. And I think having that movement is very important for the health of the body. And, central to this vitalist model of living and approaching things is to have a connection and a relationship to nature. And so I think this is a really, really big thing for to be integrated into one's daily rhythm, is to get that outside time, get that movement in, move your body. Especially people, that maybe tend towards a little bit of melancholy or depression or just kind of feeling stuck and stagnant. Move. It's like that's one of the best ways to start moving that stuck energy, is literally to just physically move. Or even people that maybe sometimes feel nervous or anxious. Sometimes there's too much energy moving through their system, and it's gotta move out, and movement is the best way to do that. It doesn't mean you gotta go run 10 miles in the woods. Just go for a walk around the block. Take 10 minutes to walk around the block, and while you do so, just kind of don't be sitting on your phone or on a phone call. Just take that time to be with the natural world in whatever capacity nature is around you is really, really huge. And along that line, the next part here is resting when you're tired or taking breaks. This culture that we live in these days is so driven and so produce, and like puts that stress on our heart, and it puts that stress on our mind. And it's not good. It's not good for us. And we have this, I feel like there's this cultural mentality of like work, 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 work. And if you take a rest or take a break or take a little nap in the middle of the day or something, then you're like being lazy. And I know I definitely have been kind of programmed that way for sure. And and so there's a thing of like rest when you're tired, and certainly that's not always possible, because if you're at work on the clock, you can't just be like, oh boss, I'm going to take a quick nap, I feel tired. It's like, yeah, certainly you can't do that. But there's a dynamic here of like resting and like slowing down, I think, is a good part of this. Is nature moves slowly. You don't put a seed in the ground and the next day you've got a huge plant and it's flowering. Like, no, that plant, the seed has to open, and it takes in the water and the sun, and it slowly puts out its leaf, and it slowly grows. And it's like there's a cycle to it, Look at the way animals move, They're patient. They're not rushing around, They're just, the deer is moving at its own pace. The bear is taking its time when it walks in the woods and is, going to the river to hunt for fish, or, it's like, just pay attention to nature. Look at how nature, it doesn't rush. It doesn't move all scattered. It's like there's a patience and the way that, and a slowness in a way to the way it moves. And humanity, from nature's perspective, it probably just looks crazy. We're all just rushing and running around and stressing out. And so this is one thing that I think is very important for us to remember, is to take that time to rest and to break and to pause, to take those pauses so that our bodies have time to kind of recuperate and rejuvenate. It's so easy to, when we get tired, to just drink that next cup of coffee or tea or matcha or mate, whatever it is, to go, 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 go. I mean, it's no wonder like caffeine containing plants are like the number one top consumed plants in the world. I think that really says a lot to kind of the unspoken expectation present in modern culture. And I just don't really think it's that A, healthy, and B, it's antithetical to the vital force. If you're tired, the vital force of your body is telling you to take a break, to slow down, to stop, to rest. So that's another vitalist practice in the daily life. And lastly, go to bed with the sun, right? Rise with the sun, go to bed with the sun. And that's that rhythm. And I think, to me, it's like as the sun's going down, it's like to reside in lower light. This is one of the big reasons I think a lot of people have sleep issues is, we're in artificially lit buildings, we're, on screens a lot. We're just our eyes and our senses are constantly being bombarded with all of this light and stimulation from TVs and computers and phones and all that stuff that it really affects our sleep and our energy levels. And this is why, like, anyone that goes camping knows this. Like, you go camping and it's like sun starts to go down, you're sitting in front of a fire, you get tired pretty early. It's like, well, okay, well, I'm ready for bed, you know? And I think this is one way that we can, again, line our lives up with the pattern of nature. So the second kind of part of this, looking at the daily pattern, we can also look at our seasonal patterns. I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly here because I don't want the post to get too long, but there's a way in Vitalism that we approach living kind of within the seasons that honestly most of us practice quite intuitively. You come inside from a really cold, stormy, snowy day, you don't want to drink a smoothie usually, right? I mean, unless you're silly like me and, was just eating uncooked food for years in a cold environment, which, doesn't intuitively make sense if you really think about it. Oh, you want hot soup, you want a cup of ginger tea, you want a nice warm beverage, So a lot of us actually practice energetics or vitalism kind of intuitively, right? We bundle up on a cold day, we dress down on a hot day, things like that. So I think one of the ways that we can do this, again, kind of coming back to food and diet, is adjusting our diet seasonally. It's, in the summer months, it's really great to eat those cooling type foods, eating the cucumbers and the fresh greens out of the garden and like the melons and the berries. These are all those foods that are ripe in that season that are really, really good because they tend to cool us down in hot environments. In the winter months, this is where we're eating more, richer foods and heavier foods and things that, fatty foods that insulate us, things with warming spices to keep us warm. So adjusting our foods accordingly to the seasons, I think, is really a really powerful way to live in a greater accordance with nature. And of course, eating seasonally to the best of our abilities, Our modern grocery stores have led to some really strange things that we can eat year round. Like you can buy tomatoes in February from a grocery store because they're grown in like sunnier environments where a tomato can grow and be ripened in that season. But I think, the movement of, local food and seasonal food to me is a very vitalist practice because we're eating the things that grow around us. Of course, wild foods are huge here too. Locally grown foods, wild foods, and the things that are ripe at that time. So that's another way that we can really deepen our connection to nature and following that rhythm. And kind of along with that is like adjusting that sleeping and waking cycle. So, if you're waking up with the sun and going to bed with the sun, naturally that rhythm shifts throughout the year. Coming out of the summer here pretty soon. But boy, up here in Washington, it's like June, July. I mean, it's getting light at 4 or 4:30 in the morning and getting dark at sometimes like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Makes for a really long day. And so this is where that other one in the daily rhythm of like rest when you're tired. I think, the cultures that do the kind of midday break, there's some wisdom in that, especially in the summer and you're getting up early and going to bed late. Having that midday rest period is a really nice rhythm to get into. But I think, again, as the seasons change, we're just paying attention to nature and moving with that. Another big one here with seasonal harmony, and I'm hitting these from a really high level. There's a lot more detail, obviously, that can be gone into on all of these. But another big one is kind of in the yearly rhythm and the seasonal changes that I believe it's very healthy and very vitalist to go through fasting periods, whether that be fasting or modified fasting or kind of cleansing our bodies, before the, agricultural movements and revolutions and having like food available all the time, there were periods where we would go through periods of feast and periods of famine, and our bodies biologically, physiologically are kind of set up for that. And our modern world has made it that we, as humans, are oftentimes in a feast phase more often than we are in a fasting phase. Like, we're in feast phase all the time because we have such, a lot of places, just food available all of the time. And I believe it's really healthy for our bodies to give them a break and a rest from being in that constantly fed state and entering into a fasting state and cleansing the body of metabolic waste products and just kind of giving your digestion a rest, giving your liver a rest. But there's ways to go about that. And I think Ayurveda, the Ayurvedic system, has that very dialed in, very fine-tuned in the sense of, for example, a cold, damp person, is going to typically want to cleanse at a different time of the year than someone that tends to be really, really hot in their constitution versus someone that's really dry and tense in their constitution. So there's a time when we see when those energies build up within the body, that heat builds up in the summer, right? And that's why it's really good for someone with that hot constitution to kind of cleanse that heat out of their body towards the end of that season when it's needing to move out as the seasons change. So seasonal kind of cleansing or fasting according to your unique constitution, I think, is a really, really powerful, holistic, natural way that we can just take care of ourselves and maintain that balance in our bodies. Because, in Vitalism, they say, we get sick when any of these qualities become too excessive, right? Too much cold, too much damp, too much hot, too much dry, too much tension, too much relaxation in the body. Those energies can build up, and the seasons and the weather makes them fluctuate within our system, so that there's ways that we can see how those forces are moving in nature and moving within our body and make sure that they're able to kind of clear out when they start to build up and get in excess. And of course, we in the modern world, we tend to really focus on the cleansing side of things, but we forget about the rejuvenation side of things. So there's also an attribute of rejuvenating our body through herbs and through periods of rest. Again, I was kind of talking in the daily rhythm, taking periods of rest. I think kind of looking at the grander scheme of things, it's important for us to take breaks, to not be, take a vacation, or if you can, or to take time to just rejuvenate ourselves, whether that's taking a staycation and just being at home and doing things that you enjoy doing. I guess my point is like taking breaks to enjoy your life and to uplift yourself in your heart and in your mind, and to take that time to do the things that you enjoy doing to rejuvenate. So kind of cleansing and rejuvenation is something that I feel like is very important in terms of aligning our lives with nature. Nature does that all the time, right? Nature has periods of cleansing. The deciduous trees drop their leaves, the plants die back, the rivers rise, the rivers lower, the snow builds up on the mountain, the snow melts off of the mountain. It's like these are periods of cleansing and then rebuilding and rejuvenation. And this is something that I believe is very important for us as humans to incorporate. So we see that happen in nature. We see feasting and fasting happen in nature. Look at a bear, right? I mean, a bear, hibernates for the winter and doesn't have food. And then they come out and then they have their period where they're rebuilding themselves. So I think the more that we can do that as humans, if we look at nature, everything else in nature does that. But the way that we've set up our modern world, we kind of are only in one phase of that. We're kind of constantly building, feasting, and we don't take that time for cleansing. So that's very, very important. So these are kind of some of the ways that I see the seasonal patterns. And I know these are like really pretty simple things, but man, they're actually really, really powerful. Really, really powerful just daily practices, ways, things that you can incorporate into your lifestyle to be more of a vitalist, right? To be more in harmony and connection with the rhythms and cycles and patterns in nature. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining me in this video here, whether you're watching it on YouTube, the blog, listening to the podcast. Go ahead and like and subscribe. It really helps support our channel and helps us continue to be able to produce more free content for the community. Be sure to head on over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, which is where everything is at, everything is happening. And I really appreciate you watching this through the end of the video. If you're still here, thanks so much for joining me. And until the next one, take care and be well.